Nobody talks about Generation X. Seriously, think about it. Every documentary, every think piece, every viral tweet is either about boomers destroying the economy or millennials killing chain restaurants or Gen Z and their attention spans. But there's this entire generation sitting right in the middle, born between 1965 and 1980, quietly watching all of it unfold, not complaining, not posting about it, just getting on with it. And here's what's fascinating. That silence, that's not indifference. That's psychology. Because what happened to the people who grew up in those specific 15 years created something that researchers are only now beginning to fully understand. A kind of psychological wiring that is becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable in the modern world. So today, we're going to get into all of it. We're going to talk about why Gen X became the most self-reliant generation in modern history, why their relationship with authority is unlike any generation before or after them, and why the very things that looked like neglect from the outside were actually building something extraordinary on the inside. By the end of this, whether you are Gen X or you simply know someone who is, you're going to see them completely differently. Let's get into it. Picture this. It's 1974. You're 9 years old. The school bus drops you off at the end of your street, and you walk home alone. You fish the key out from under the doormat, or maybe it's on a string around your neck, and you let yourself in. The house is quiet. Both parents are working. There's a note on the kitchen counter. Snacks in the fridge, homework first. Be back by 6. No phone to call them on. No way for them to check if you made it home. No ring camera, no GPS, no emergency contact app. Just you, the hum of the refrigerator, and the next 3 hours. And here's what most people get completely wrong about that moment. They look at it and see neglect. They see a child left alone, unsupervised, unprotected. But that's not what was happening. What was actually happening, neurologically, psychologically, was something far more significant. By 1984, approximately 7 million American children between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. An entire generation learning every single afternoon that they were capable, that they could handle the next few hours, that the world didn't fall apart just because no adult was watching. Psychologists call this the development of an internal locus of control, the deep, bone-level belief that your actions directly shape your outcomes. But for Gen X, it wasn't a concept taught in a classroom. It was just Tuesday, and it didn't stop at the front door. Once the homework was done, or sometimes before, let's be honest, you were outside. And outside meant the entire neighborhood was yours. The woods at the end of the street, the vacant lot behind the grocery store, the creek that your parents technically told you to stay away from. You built forts out of whatever you could find. Scrap plywood, old carpet, milk crates borrowed from behind the diner. No instructions, no adults, no YouTube tutorial. You just figured it out. And when the roof leaked the first time it rained, therefore, you learned to overlap the boards. When the structure collapsed, but you rebuilt it stronger. When two kids wanted the same spot and nobody was there to referee, therefore, you negotiated. You compromised. You stood your ground or you let it go, and you learned the difference between the two. Neuroscientists now have a term for what was being built in those woods: executive function, the ability to plan, adapt, regulate emotions, and solve problems without external guidance. Gen X didn't get executive function from a structured enrichment program. They got it from a pile of scrap wood and an afternoon with nothing else to do. Layoffs, divorce statistics climbing. But here's where it gets deeper. Because Gen X wasn't just shaped by what happened at home. They were shaped by what they watched happen in the world. They grew up watching Watergate unfold on the evening news. They watched their parents' generation preach loyalty to companies. But those same companies handed out pink slips without blinking. They watched divorce rates climb through the 70s and 80s. They watched adults in positions of power make catastrophic decisions and face almost no consequences. And so, therefore, they stopped believing in institutions. Not in a dramatic, revolutionary way. Not with protests or manifestos, just quietly, privately, permanently. Psychologists call it defensive pessimism, a cognitive strategy where you mentally prepare for the worst outcome so that you're never blindsided by it. Gen X didn't develop this in a therapist's office. They developed it by watching the world break its own promises over and over again. And here's the reframe that matters. That's not cynicism. That's not bitterness. That's armor. And armor keeps you standing when everything around you falls apart. Now let's talk about something that barely exists anymore, the Gen X first job. Not an internship, not a resume builder, not a supervised work experience program with a mentor and a feedback form. A paper route at 5 in the morning, while the rest of the neighborhood was still asleep. Folding heavy Sunday editions on a cold garage floor, loading a canvas bag that weighed almost as much as you did, and pedaling out into the dark. And once a month. But here's the part nobody talks about. You had to go collecting. You knocked on doors. You looked adults in the eye. You asked for money they owed you. Sometimes they paid, sometimes they didn't. And you learned at 12 years old how to handle both outcomes without falling apart. You weren't a child in those moments. You were a local businessman. And when you finally got that paycheck, a physical check, not a direct deposit notification on an app, you walked it into a bank, stood in a line, and felt the weight of that paper in your hand. Therefore, you understood what a dollar actually cost. Not in theory, in hours, in cold mornings, in doors slammed in your face. Research consistently shows that people who held real responsibility jobs in early adolescence develop significantly stronger work ethic, financial discipline, and stress tolerance in adulthood. Gen X didn't read that research, they lived it. Here's something that confuses people about Gen X at first. They're not anti-authority, but they're absolutely not blindly obedient either. They respect competence, they have zero patience for titles, and when you understand where that comes from, it makes complete sense. They grew up in homes where consequences were immediate and physical. You stepped out of line, therefore you paid for it right then and there. No lengthy discussion, no processing your feelings. Clear cause, immediate effect. That wiring doesn't disappear. It creates adults who understand that actions have real consequences, and who expect the same accountability from the people above them. But they also watch those same authority figures fail spectacularly on a national scale. Watergate. The AIDS crisis mishandled. Corporate America eating its own workers alive. So they developed a filter. Show me what you can actually do. Prove you know what you're talking about. Earn it. And if you can't, Gen X will simply work around you. Quietly, efficiently, without making a scene. Because making a scene was never really their style. Now here's the part that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Gen X didn't just survive an analog childhood. They also had to completely rebuild themselves for a digital world, as adults. They were the last generation to grow up without the internet, but they were young enough when it arrived to adapt to it fully. They remember what it felt like to look something up in an actual encyclopedia, to drive somewhere without GPS and just figure it out, to lose touch with someone and have that just be the end of that chapter. Therefore, they have a relationship with information that no other generation shares. They know what it costs to find something out. They spend hours in libraries, pulling drawers from card catalogs, hunting through stacks for a single book that might contain the answer they needed. Cognitive psychologists call this deeper encoding. Information that requires effort to obtain becomes more permanently integrated into memory. Gen X doesn't just know things. They own what they know. And when the internet arrived and suddenly information was free and instant and everywhere, they appreciated it in a way that younger generations simply can't. Because they knew what the alternative felt like. They are, in the truest sense, the bridge generation. 1 foot in the analog world, 1 foot in the digital one. Fluent in both. Nostalgic for neither. So here's what all of this adds up to. Generation X was raised in a way that looked, from the outside, like benign neglect. Unsupervised afternoons. Early jobs with real stakes. A world that didn't soften its edges for them. Authority figures who let them down. Institutions that broke their promises. But that's not the story. The story is that all of those things, every empty house, every cold paper route morning, every negotiation in the woods with no adult to referee, were building something. A generation that doesn't need to be managed. That figures things out. That shows up without being asked and gets the job done without needing a trophy for it. A generation with an internal compass so well calibrated that they can walk into chaos and immediately start solving problems while everyone else is still looking around for someone to tell them what to do. Psychologists are increasingly recognizing that the traits forged in Gen X childhoods self-reliance, emotional resilience, adaptive thinking, deep competence are exactly the traits the modern world is desperately trying to teach people through apps and workshops and coaching programs. Gen X got them for free, in the woods, on a bike, with a key around their neck. They were never the loudest generation. They were never the most celebrated. They don't post about their struggles or wait for the world to acknowledge what they've been through. But maybe that's the most Gen X thing of all. They don't need you to notice. They already know who they are. If this resonated with you, whether you're Gen X yourself or you grew up alongside someone who is, I'd genuinely love to hear your story in the comments below. And if you want to keep going deeper on the psychology of the generations that shaped the modern world, the next video is right here. I think you're really going to connect with it. I'll see you in the next one.